Now we turn to an important report the Trump administration might not want you to hear about. This administration is cracking down on key protections for victims of human trafficking. This is an international crisis that impacts 40 million victims annually. They call it modern slavery. And while the human rights and immigration rules are key here, President Trump has actually mostly invoked these victims as props for a wider immigration agenda.
But if you look at the human trafficking, they come in, they nab women, they grab them, they put tape over their mouth, they tie their hands, and they go right over that border. They have tape over their mouths, electrical tape, usually blue tape, as they call it. It's powerful stuff, not good. Women are tied up, they're bound, duct tape put around their faces, around their mouths. In many cases, they can't even breathe.
The president gives those speeches and has used related powers of his office to draw attention to this issue. He declared January as National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. He also created an interagency task force on this issue. Now, with the right policy, those other steps could be constructive. But tonight, I'm reporting for you on the fact that the Trump administration's actual policies and protections for these victims are lacking. And that has more impact, of course, than words. Let me mention one basic point as well. Protecting victims of sex trafficking isn't historically in America been an ideological issue. Administrations from both parties have recognized these people, foreign-born people seeking asylum, as worthwhile candidates for something called a Human Rights T visa. And it provides victims a safe haven and potential work in the U.S. You had President Bush create a version of this visa, and President Obama continued it.
One of the ways traffickers keep women and girls enslaved is by telling them they will be arrested and deported if they try to run away. We're removing that tool of coercion by treating the victims of trafficking not as illegal aliens, but as refugees. They should find the protection and generous heart of America.
We're working to simplify visa procedures for T visas so that innocent victims from other countries can stay here as they help us prosecute their traffickers.
Over the last decade, more than two-thirds of those applications have been approved. Those people that Bush said are people, not illegal aliens, well, a lot of them got visas. And since taking office, the Trump administration is reversing this trend. Take a look at the rate of visa approvals for trafficking victim applicants since 2014. Down to 60% in Trump's first year in office, and now falling all the way to 43% last year. You see the trend line. This is a major drop. And since 2005, visa denials remained rather steadily after an uptick in 2015. Last year, you had more applicants denied visas than any year since 2005. So the result is you have the number of approved visas hitting, under Trump, this 7-year low. And that's not all. A backlog of pending applicants doubling from 2 years earlier to a record high. Translation, the problem's getting worse, and the Trump administration is getting worse in dealing with the problem. And it goes beyond visas. Look at this. Last November, the Trump administration put out a notice telling these victims they might have to go through deportation proceedings in immigration court if they're denied their visas. So if the victims do apply for help and they're denied, which you can see is more likely, they're not lawfully in the U.S., they can face this additional punishment. This is a fear tactic that actually Bush was speaking about in 2004, how traffickers use the fear of that deportation to prevent these victims, again, these millions of global victims of sex trafficking, from ever running away in the first place. The New Yorker's reported on this and talks about authorities asked that the victims provide further proof they were trafficked in order to qualify for protections. And when it comes to prosecuting the traffickers, the Washington Post reporting in 2017, new cases opened by the DOJ against the traffickers was falling from the previous year. Putting an end to human trafficking has always been a bipartisan goal since, as I mentioned, these policies got going. And Trump has claimed to be a crusader, but we've been showing you here how he's working against these victims. Now, we did reach out, and we got USCIS responding to this, that those who are denied a T visa are summoned to court on a case-by-case basis, they say. Trump administration telling us they can appeal negative decisions and they still have their right to due process. And we want to include, as always, their view of these facts. But Donald Trump's desire to clamp down on the border is sidelining these people who are actually suffering some of the worst crimes known to man in the world. And again, it's not Democrats or Republicans with different views about the wider immigration debate, which is a big debate. It is Donald Trump not protecting these victims and then using their own horrific stories to push his separate agenda.
They nab women, they grab them, they put tape over their mouth. Electrical tape, usually blue tape, as they call it. It's powerful stuff, not good.
The problem is powerful, but the facts indicate President Trump is actually undercutting the very protections for those victims that he keeps invoking as props. Presidents of both parties have long stood united in this basic human rights policy. And we are talking about people, about potential immigrants who've suffered unimaginable tragedies, seeking, I think it's fair to say this, seeking one of the best things that America can offer, at least on its best day: protection and asylum for the needy. That protection, those visas, matters a heck of a lot more to, I think, those people than any political speech. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.